You will be familiar perhaps with our Don't Kill Cash campaign, something we feel very passionately about here on this channel. You know, in society, we're all different people with different choices. If you want to pay by your debit card, if you want to pay online, good, brilliant. But if you also choose to pay by cash, we feel very passionately that you should be able to do so. So, with the help of all of you guys at home, almost 300,000 of you to be precise, we're trying very hard, and we're not going to stop trying to make the government sit up and listen. We handed a petition into Downing Street today. There we all are, gathered around number 11, the door, and, you know, we're going to keep fighting for this, Frank. What do you feel about this notion that cash is disappearing? Businesses proudly declare we are a cashless zone.
Well, you know, money and credit cards are not kind of equivalents, either physical or moral equivalents, because when I use money, when I use cash, I'm pretty much an anonymous individual. I can make decisions about where I buy stuff, what I buy. Nobody knows how I spend my money. Whereas once you rely on credit cards, then you really are in the hands of these big companies who can both keep an eye on you, but even more importantly, who have this phenomenal amount of degree of control over your everyday life. And I don't know if you ever had the experience when you try to use a credit card and it was rejected because somebody in the credit card company made a mistake. Imagine if...
or you're skint.
Or you're skint. Imagine if your entire life is dependent on this credit card, what a lot of problems that creates. But worse still, imagine what it does to elderly people. Imagine what it does to people who are maybe a little bit illiterate when it comes to using digital technology. And I've seen just a couple of days ago an old lady literally crying because she couldn't get the right kind of numbers in using her credit card at the co-op. And those kinds of experiences are going to become more and more prominent. And we know already from the experience of Sweden, where they tried this horrible experiment, that it does cause a lot of grief for a lot of people in our society. So a great campaign. I fully support it. And I do think we need to allow people to have more freedom making choices about how they spend their money.
Do you agree, David?
Yes. I mean, of course, in principle, I agree with every single word that Frank said. In practice, I try and avoid carrying cash as much as possible. It's a nuisance. I hate change. The simplicity of using the card is overwhelming. And, of course, it's also true the other way around. And again, we need to look at the practical implications of this. Remember, one of the reasons that shops are so keen to do this, they eliminate risk. They eliminate the risk of carrying cash, the risk of robbery. They eliminate the trouble of taking it to a bank because, of course, there's no longer a neighbourhood bank. There's no longer an easy way of getting rid of the cash. So it's part, I'm afraid, of what I think is an irreversible movement towards effectively a faceless, remote, electronically enabled society. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to get used to it.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I think there's too many things in society.
Sorry, again, I've conceded the point. Everything Frank said was right.
No, I'm
but
saying
are
to
not
you,
all the pressures overwhelming? I'm sorry, a little petition to Downing Street with an obscure station, which we are, making weepy noises on the steps of number 11 isn't going to change.
But I disagree with your fundamental point, which is what you're saying is that essentially this is changing, so we just have to accept with it. I don't share that view. I think that what happened was during COVID, people used COVID as an excuse to try and ease in these cashless environments. They started making all ridiculous excuses such as, oh, it was touching things, it was touching cash. It wasn't that at all. And now what I think is actually happening is that we're moving more and more towards digital currencies, particularly centrally controlled digital currencies. And I reject that. And actually, I don't share that notion of saying, oh, well, it's inevitable, so let's just sit there. It doesn't matter to me whether, yes, we're not, we're not whatever.
Do you really do you have time to go into a supermarket and find out where your favourite processed peas are, because I don't eat processed peas, by the way, but the sheer convenience, of online is why
that's your
it's triumphed.
choice.
Yeah, but you're
What if
being a little bit
someone's making a
cynical.
different choice?
I mean,
If someone's making a choice to pay by cash, and this is what we're pushing back against, if you want the convenience of not having to look for your processed peas, then good for you. But if somebody wants to pay with their cash, what we're pushing back on is saying that person should have a choice, and I reject the notion, we reject
Can
the
I
notion
then
that
give
it's
you
a done
another
deal.
argument? That person will have to pay more.
Why?
Because that transaction is now much more expensive. It's much more expensive in terms of personnel, it's expensive in terms of security, it's expensive in terms of accounting. Now, we are going to have to face this.
But that shouldn't be the case.
The real world, the old world that you want to preserve, I'm afraid it's going to be a bit like a series of historic monuments.
Why do you assume that you have to live in a world where there's only one regime for these kinds of transactions? And what do you assume?
I've just said you've got to recognise that one will be more expensive than the other.
But not necessarily. Why should we exclude a lot of people who find it almost impossible to use digital technology?
Why do we charge them more, I'm afraid, to have a coin-operated meter? Because it's more expensive to run.
At the moment, credit cards are more expensive. So for most shops, when you use a credit card, they pay a premium on the credit card
But
in the way they don't for
it's
cash
still
transactions.
cheaper for them because they don't have the machinery of dealing with cash.
There's a flaw in your argument,
I'm sorry,
David.
Frank, they are not shifting. They're not shifting to a cashless society for our convenience. They're shifting to it from theirs.
Absolutely, but we have got to stand up for our convenience.
Yes, well,
And
we
it's-
are
As long
going
as
to
you're
do that.
prepared to pay more for your primitive... I'm sorry, I'm the historian. For your primitive historicist instincts,
But
you've just got to
there's
pay
a
more.
flaw in your argument, because if what you're saying is that the retailer is going to pass on the cost of sale to the consumer, so therefore you transacting in cash should pay more, that doesn't stand up to me, because if the cost of sale is less, so i.e. you're sacking all your checkout people like what I was, and you're replacing those people with technology, so therefore you've got a reduction in your cost of sale. You're not passing that on. You're not giving people a reduction in their prices, because all of a sudden you've got these cost savings of laying half your workforce off. So if you don't pass it on that way, then I think you should absolutely fundamentally reject
Have you ever
passing it
looked
on
at the
other way.
relationship between the interest that banks charge and the interest that banks pay?
Oh,
There's the answer.
don't even get me started on that one. There you go. We're off to a flying start. What do you make to this whole cash conversation? If you do want to keep your cash, would you be prepared to pay more? Maybe you would. I don't know. You get in touch and tell me.